Hey, what's up, guys? Josiah here with EasyCaters.com, and today I'm going to be demonstrating a new tool that I've been working on recently, and this is the visual dividend yield and visual earnings yield tools. And so these come together in a package, and what essentially these allow you to do is define pivot points on your chart using whether you're using percentage-based reversal or price-based reversals, ATR-based reversals. You can define, swing points based on those criteria, and then visualize on the chart what the earnings yield was for the trailing 12-month time period at that point in time or at that pivot point. So this allows you to see, where support and resistance might be in terms of dividend yield. This is a concept that I've read about in some old books, and I thought I'd play around with it. And what I kind of stumbled across here, I thought was pretty interesting and might be useful. So I wanted to develop it further, and so this is what I've ended up with, and I plan on continuing to develop this further, but with updates in the future. But so this is allows you to see, like I said, some support and resistance points based on when a stock gets oversold and the dividend yield starts to get higher, well, that kind of encourages dividend investors, longer term investors, to step in and bid that back up. And so if the dividend yield gets too out of whack on the high side, then that's indicating that the stock is oversold. And if it gets too overbought and the dividend yield gets too low, then people start getting out of their positions and so forth. So that's what this is based on, or the idea behind it. And so what the indicator does, so you can see here, we have the pivot points. You can turn those on or off if you want to visualize those. Then up here we have the labels that show you what the current yield is, what the lowest yield has ever been on the chart, the price that the stock would need to be at the current yield rate for it to be at that lowest yield. Then we have this would be considered like, and the easiest way to look at this is then we have the midpoint between the lowest and the highest yields. So we have the lowest yield, the highest yield, the price at which it would need to reach for it to be at that highest yield based on the current yield or the current dividend amount. And and then we have the midpoints, then 75% line, and then the 25% line, and then we have an average. And so the average and the midpoint can be two different things, but they kind of give you a little bit two different gauges of what a midpoint or a typical value would be. And so what you can see on the chart here is that I've got plotted the actual average value, which is this value here, and it's plotting the predicted price that we would need to reach if we were to wait for if we were holding out for a dividend yield of 3.75, we would need to wait for price to reach this level here. And then we have standard deviation levels here, which this is actually a half a standard deviation above the currently I have it set to a half a standard deviation above and below. And so that gives you two other reference points that you can customize to one standard deviation, two standard deviations, whatever level you want. And those give you some additional reference points to see, okay, well, this might be starting to get into a value area or not. So that's what that looks like. And so we can look at some other examples here of stocks that seem to, now not all stocks behave really well with use the dividend yield as a support and resistance point. But you can see here like some of the the dividend standards that have been kind of paying dividends forever, and the dividend aristocrat types and those types of stocks. These tend to do pretty well, and so you can see here whenever the price gets to where the yield is down in around this average to 1/2 standard deviation range around the average, this is starting to become a value area. And so you can kind of see how that works on Johnson & Johnson. See some other ones in here. Cisco was one that seemed to behave pretty well, I think. Yeah, so you can see here that this half standard deviation line, it seems to be a pretty good area in recent history where you want to, keep an eye out at that level and start considering a purchase when price gets back down to that range. So those are a couple of examples. Let's see here, DE. So not all stocks perform well with this, and so this is an example where it's performed well in recent history, but previously it wasn't working that well. We can look at some other examples here. And let me just zoom out. So we can look at some other examples here. Here's Pepsi, which you can see whenever it tends to get down to the lower end of this range, that it tends to be a good value area to be buying it. Down here, we were definitely getting oversold in terms of dividends, and so these would have been really good value buys in those terms. So you can see that certain stocks work really well with this, and some don't work really well with it. It just depends on the behavior of the stock, and it's really easy to create a list of those that behave really well and trade based on that, and plan your accumulations of dividend type stocks, dividend paying stocks with that in mind. And so this allows you a way of timing those entries and getting a visual idea, of certain levels to keep an eye out on. So that's the dividend yield. Now, earnings yield is essentially the same. It allows you to see on the chart what the current earnings yield is, what the lowest has been in the past, what the highest has been in the past. And then we have average and midpoints and some levels around those at 75% and 25% that you can keep an eye out on as well. So you can plot all of these levels, and you can also plot the average and 2 standard deviation levels at a specific multiple of the standard deviation. So these are set at 1/2 standard deviation, like I said, and you can adjust that as needed. But this allows you to see visually on the chart where earnings yield is relative to where it has been in the past, and whether or not we might be getting into an attractive area at which to acquire a stock. All right, so as far as a quick walkthrough of the settings, this is the settings panel for the earnings yield indicator. You can set all the colors for each of the labels up here, and those you can set all the colors for the different plots that are available. So we have the highest level plot. I have these turned off, but it's easy to turn those back on just by checking this checkbox here for show plot. And so now you can see the highest yield, what the price would need to be if it were to reach the highest yield, which would be down here at this green, and then the lowest yield, which would be this red line up at the top. And then we have the midpoint, which we can plot as well, which would be a bright yellow line here. And then you have your mid upper and mid lower, and you got your standard deviation levels for the average and the average itself. So that's what those look like. You can customize it however you want, change the line styles and colors and so forth. Let me turn these back off to clean up the chart a little bit. And then I will, let's see here, go in here. So the label colors, for low yield, you can change that to whatever you want. You can see here that will change it to pink. So you can adjust those as needed. You can turn the labels, the different types of labels on or off. If you want to only show the yield labels, you can turn that one on. If you only want to show the price labels, you can turn only that one on. So this is what it looks like with just the percentages, the yield amounts. And this is what it looks like with just the dollar amounts. So those would be the prices that you would want to keep an eye out on for the different, high yield levels, medium high yield levels, average yield levels, and then low yield levels. So those are the what those prices mean. So you can customize this in many different ways. So you've got the standard deviation levels here that you can change the multiple of. You've got the ability to adjust the zigzags and how those are defined here. You can turn the bubbles or balloons, however you want to, whatever you want to call them, you can turn those on or off so that you don't have to keep those on your chart all the time if you don't want. And so there's a lot of different ways to customize it. And all the same settings are on the dividend yield indicator as well. If we go in here into settings, you can see we've got the deviation levels, you've got the show and hide the percentages and the prices, as well as the zigzag bubbles that show the yield at the highs and lows of pivots. You can define the pivots again here, and all the same plots for the dividend yield, as well as the colors for those labels. Now you can use both of these at the same time, so if I want to keep both of them on my chart, I can do that here. And you can turn off the lines or the bubbles for one. This is what it would look like for both of them being on the chart at one time. But if you wanted to turn the bubbles off for, say, earnings yield, and we could turn off the levels as well, the plots. Let me turn off those real quick as an example. These are the standard deviation levels I'm turning off right now. So now this will plot the labels for both, but now it will only plot the levels for the dividend yield and as well as the bubbles for the dividend yield. So that's how that works. You can customize it in a lot of different ways, and then you have the labels here identifying these as the dividend yield and these as the earnings yield, and you can drag these one above the other to rearrange them to determine which one goes first, like that. So hopefully that explains everything for you. If you have any questions for me, you can always contact me on easycaters.com, and we will talk to you next time. Thanks.